What's going on, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Pickups. So today I'm going to show you quite a few things I picked up over the last couple months or so, including some Saturn games, a Saturn accessory, and a couple Dreamcast games. So first I'll start off with the Saturn games. So these first few games I got in a lot on eBay for $10.91. I actually negotiated with the seller to get these for that price, but I think I got a real good deal. And I even got some bonus games, which I'll show you a bit later on, and I'll tell you why I got them. But first off, we have a complete copy of Shell Shock. Shell Shock is a 3D tank simulator. It's got an interesting theme to it. It's actually got kind of a hip-hop theme to it. It's got hip-hop music playing in the background, and it's just got a interesting style to it. You can check out my first look video on this. It's actually a pretty good game. As you can see, it is complete. This was obviously not in here originally. This was put in for shipping. But yeah, that is the first game. The second one here is Doom. Doom was actually not listed on eBay. I had contacted the seller to negotiate the price, and the seller sent me a list of other games that they had that they didn't list, and one of them was Doom. It is obviously missing the manual, and unfortunately the case is a bit sun-faded. Apparently it was sitting in a store window, but it works fine. Unfortunately, it's not really the greatest port of Doom. Has some frame rate issues, but it was definitely a good deal because this game alone normally sells for 15 plus, and this was included with the lot for 11 bucks. So definitely a good deal on that. So next up, we have Tetris Plus. I actually own this game on the PlayStation 1. Or I do own this game on the PlayStation 1, and I really like it. It is my favorite game of Tetris. It's got an interesting twist to it, unlike normal Tetris games where you just try and keep the blocks from getting to the top. This, you're actually trying to get this archaeologist here down to the bottom of the level by breaking all the locks, and once he hits the bottom below the blocks, you win. So it's kind of interesting, and there's also a spike, as you can see here. There's some spikes coming down continually as you're playing, so if the spikes hit the archaeologist, it's game over. But it is a good game, and I think I may do a video on this. But yeah, those are the three main games I got for $10.91. But I actually got some bonus games with this. In the list of games that the seller sent me, there were also a few games apparently that didn't work. They were too scratched up and just didn't work right. So the seller just decided to throw them in the package anyway. So the games are Amok. These are all disc-only games. Virtua Cop 2 and Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei. Now I actually ended up getting all these games to work, which is awesome. I actually did a video on Panzer Dragoon 2, but the way I do, or the way I fix these games is by using this stuff here, which is called Novus Scratch Remover. It actually comes in three different bottles here, or three different steps. First you're supposed to clean the disc with this, and then you use the fine scratch remover to remove small fine scratches, and then you use the heavy scratch remover to remove the deeper scratches. But all in all, it worked really well. All these games ended up working after I used scratch remover on them. They did not work before, so it worked really well, and the discs actually look a lot better than they did when I got them too. You probably can't really tell on the camera, but they actually don't look too bad. They were really scratched up when I first got them. So this stuff works really well, so if you need to remove scratches from some discs, definitely check this stuff out. But yeah, all these games do work. I mean, I haven't played through every single one of them. I just turned them on briefly to test, except for Panzer Dragoon 2. I played quite a bit of that. The initial cutscene in the game will crash, so you need to skip that cutscene. Other than that, it works fine. Virtual Cop 2 works fine. AMOC works fine as well. And I may do a video on AMOC soon as well. So yeah, that I got all that for $10.91. So that was a fantastic deal, especially with Panzer Dragoon 2 in here, which is probably around $15 in itself. The other games, not so much. AMOC and Virtual Cop 2 are pretty common. There was another game in here. I forget what the game was called. It's a very common first-person shooter. It's a space theme to it, but it had a crack in the disc, so I didn't want to risk putting it in my Saturn, so I just threw that out. But yeah, those are the Saturn games. So next up we have a couple Dreamcast games, the first of which is Four Wheel Thunder. Four Wheel Thunder, I guess you could say, is kind of the sequel to Hydro Thunder, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. But unlike Hydro Thunder, this actually wasn't developed by Midway, although it was published by them. It was developed by a different company named Callisto Entertainment, although you really wouldn't know it because this game is very, very similar to Hydro Thunder. From the sound effects to the actual gameplay itself, it's extremely similar. But of course, this is not a speedboat racing game, but is actually an all-terrain racing game. But this game apparently wasn't even supposed to be part of the Thunder series at first. It was developed as an entirely different game, but when Midway picked it up as publisher, they decided to change it to put it into their Thunder series of games. So it is a very, very good game. Thanks to CD Ages for the information about it. That is very interesting. But it is a really, really good game. Unlike Hydro Thunder, this was not an arcade game. It was developed exclusively for the Dreamcast. So this has a lot more game modes and vehicles and tracks to choose from. So yeah, it is a really good game. You can check out my first look video on this. I got this game for $6.99 on eBay. So next up, we have Sonic Shuffle. Sonic Shuffle is a board game based on the Sonic franchise. A lot of people tend to trash this game, saying it's terrible. I actually don't think it's that bad. I think it's a pretty good game. I'll admit that the computer players are brutal. If you play against them, it's almost like they're cheating. But it's actually not a bad game. If you're going to play against human players, it's actually pretty good. One of the things I really like about this game is the use of the VMU. You can actually view your cards on the VMU, so if you're playing with other players, they can't see your cards, which is very cool. So this is one of the games that makes good use of the VMU. But obviously this is a complete copy, and I got this for $6.87 on Amazon, so that was a pretty good deal. Alright, so now we're down to our final two items. So the first out of the final two is this. This is an Action Replay Plus for the Sega Saturn. Now the Action Replay Plus has 4 different functions to it. The first of which is to use game cheats. The second is a memory backup, so you can back up your game saves. The third function is the extra 4 meg RAM expansion. Certain Saturn games use a RAM expansion so they can use better graphics. Usually 1 to 4 meg per game. One of the games is, I believe, X-Men vs. Street Fighter uses the 4 megabyte RAM expansion. So that's handy to have. And the final function, which is the main reason I bought this, is to boot import games. You can boot import PAL and Japanese games with this on a North American Saturn. So that's very, very cool. So I got this really cheap. I got this for only $10.50 on eBay. But there is a reason for that, because when I first got this thing was a piece of junk, basically. It didn't work. And obviously the outside is pretty ratty. As you can see, the label's torn. There's even a burn mark there. This was actually a lot worse when I first got it, but I cleaned it up quite a bit. But yeah, it didn't work. But I actually did get it to work, and I will tell you how pretty quickly, because it was a pretty complicated process, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But long story short, what I did, well, initially I just cleaned the contacts, which actually the Saturn did read it after I cleaned the contacts, but it would freeze up a lot when I tried to put in a game cheat, or if I tried to use the memory manager, it would freeze on me. So obviously there was something else wrong with it. The second thing I did was I actually opened it up. You can remove the casing with these two screws here. It comes right off and reveals the main board. So I just checked the solder points on it to make sure everything was good. There were a couple points that looked pretty barren, so I resoldered those. Um, but that didn't do anything. It didn't make any difference whatsoever. So the final thing I did, which worked perfectly, was I reflashed the firmware on this to the latest version. I believe this came with version 1.97, but I've reflashed it to version 2.02. Really the only difference between the firmware versions is the newer versions have more game cheats built in, and that's pretty much it. So I believe what happened with this was the firmware was corrupted, so flashing the new firmware completely fixed it. So it worked perfectly. So in order to flash the firmware, what I used was this, which is called the Rockin' Bee All-Stars. You can download this online and burn it. Obviously the Saturn will not read this by default unless you have a modded Saturn. So I needed to do a disk swap in order to get this to work. I'm not going to go through that whole process with you, but once this booted up, I went into the game save manager. This actually has a bunch of different things on it, a bunch of homebrew applications and games for the Saturn, but the only thing I was interested in was the game save manager, which also has a utility to reflash your Action Replay Plus and has all the firmwares built in as well. So yeah, now it works. So I got a really cheap Action Replay Plus. So this normally sells for about 30 bucks, so it was a really good deal. Obviously the external conditions not very good, but I don't really care. It works, and I'm happy I can finally boot imports and back up my game saves, obviously, as well as a nice bonus, and the 1 meg RAM expansion, 4 meg RAM expansion. All good. So the final item I have here, I got because of this. I wanted a Japanese game to test out using the Action Replay Plus, and this is King of Fighters 96 by SNK. It is obviously a fighting game. It's complete except for the fact that there's no spine card, but I don't really care too much about that. But one of the main reasons I got this game was not only because it's a Japanese game, but it also supports the 1 megabyte RAM expansion. So I could also test that out on the Action Replay Plus as well. Of course, I still don't know if it works. I mean, the game booted up fine, but I don't know how to tell if the RAM expansion is actually being used. If someone knows, you can tell me in the comments, but it did work. So yeah, it was a pretty good deal. I got this for $9.85 on eBay, shipped all the way from Japan, so wasn't a bad deal, and it's complete, pretty good condition. But anyway, guys, that is my pickups for the last couple months. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please comment, rate, subscribe, and thanks for watching.